I would just like to jump into some questions for you guys, because we've been talking about where the revenues are for vehicle to grid and what the interesting technological aspects are. But what we have not really discussed yet in depth is the actual need to do vehicle to grid, to do smart charging with respect to the grid. You've talked about energy prices, kilowatt hours, but I work for Elaadnl and we're funded by the Dutch grid companies. So I've been missing the grid component a bit in all your talks, and I was wondering if you could reflect on where the benefits are for the consumers and for you as a company with respect to the grid. Who would like to reflect on that?
Yeah, I can start. So power quality is of course a very important thing also with vehicle to grid. And that's also the reason that last week together with Elaadnl we test in Culemborg charging sessions. So by Alpha chargers there on location and also a DC V2G charger. And there we did some charging profiles to the charging stations and look what was the reaction of the power quality on that charging square. And that kind of tests are really important to do, so that we know more about the grid stability on that, how you say that, on that area. And we can learn a lot from that part.
Okay, thanks. Art?
Well, we would love to be steering the V2G based on GoPax or similar protocols or signals, but we're currently so small that we don't have access to that, and so hopefully that would be possible also for customers on their own to receive this signal and be able to steer their situation on that.
You're too small with respect to the number of cars that you have.
It's a single car every time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and we're not aggregated in such as such. Or should we add something different to that, Nicholas? Okay.
Arthur?
Well, back to your question, how can it benefit the grid itself? I think it's a no-brainer to use vehicles as batteries on wheels, power banks, because there were some curves in there at the grid. You want to have it balanced all the way, and don't want to do any big investments in the net. We have the assets, we have the cars, so it's really a no-brainer that the vehicle and the grid go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then I have a follow-up question for you, because if we use the cars as such to help balance the grid, actually you put the electric vehicle owner in the seat of the grid operator. So how do you see, all of you, how do you see that with respect to the revenue streams that are involved?
There's a term called value stacking. So I think a lot of these cases, especially if the price spreads are going down, investments like batteries or electric cars, car fleets sometimes only make sense if you stack some values on top of each other. So I believe that this is really good for the grid and then for the customer value, or for let's say, we call that the business case of whoever is owning the cars, that you do use your own solar, then make use of the price spreads in the market, and then on top you might end up also in GoPax or in one of these grid operator opportunities, and then there's your business case for a long period.
Mm. And so then you see it more in groups of cars that are somehow connected by a type of ownership, like shared cars, or also privately owned cars?
From my perspective, there's it can all work. It depends on the companies realizing the business case for them. And of course, then it's a bit more difficult if there's all these private owners, the ones we are targeting first, but you can aggregate, so everything's possible. Just like with the infrastructure, we also have software capabilities, so there's nothing to really invent, no rocket technology, really no AI that doesn't exist yet. It's all there.
Okay. And I think on neighborhood level, it would be quite interesting to see what the business model is there. And then you're coming to the private owned cars and on the shared mobility cars. But when you look at shared mobility, the cars as such at this moment and that's what we found out at Share the Sun, is that the business model for shared mobility companies is that the car is on the road, is rented. Then it's the most profitable compared to the vehicle to grid part of it. But if it stands still, it's interesting to have it there. So I think it's both when able to do the shared cars, but primarily the households should be at neighborhood level. You should combine those.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. We also found that in one of our studies at Elaadnl, that in fact there was a lot of value in the leased car fleet. Although they were driving a lot, they still had a plenty capacity left when they arrived at their destination to do something. But of course, shared cars are with higher numbers and with one owner. Because what I was sort of trying to discuss, but perhaps I give a bit more of what my intentions were with the question, is like, we have this real issue in the grid operating world that we want everything to be fair, and we want all the costs to be paid equally by all consumers who have the same entrance to the grid. But if we start to award private car owners for their contribution to a stable grid, then their reward has to be paid by the people who don't have a car. So there's a worry on our part on how can we solve this problem? Or shouldn't we solve it and just don't reward people for contributing to a stable grid? Jori, perhaps you want to say something?
Yeah, it's a very nice question. I would like to have answered it with a beer maybe in my hand. It's like a little bit of philosophy. I'm answering as a EV driver, not so much as Alphen. When I'm offering part of my battery to make a grid stable, I'm offering some flexibility, right? And that flexibility should be incentivized. I should be rewarded in one way or another. So we could talk about euros. It's the most apparent, I think. On the other end, we could talk about some sort of karma system. It's probably a little bit far-fetched. So maybe we need to find it in other ways of being rewarded. Maybe I get a faster charging session later on the day or whatever. So I might be able to think of some other ways to incentivize people offering a part of their battery.
Mm. So let's go to a different subject. We've all been hearing as well that we've got this discussion about AC, vehicle to grid, DC, vehicle to grid, cars not being there, chargers not being there, protocols not being there. And we're all looking forward to the moment in time where this situation will be solved. And what do you guys personally think that will be the date where vehicle to X hardware will be massively available, where we can actually start making an impact on the neighborhood level with sufficient cars and sufficient chargers? So just give me a year, like we did at the start of the day.
I was one who was 2025.
I would wanted to say the same, actually.
Or, as what I've heard, that's not in depth, but coming years we'll see chargers coming. We've had cars being announced, the ID Buzz, whole VW being, the whole group being V2G ready. That would not take till 2025. That will be next year.
The future is not evenly distributed, right? So some neighborhoods can be 2025, 24, let's say. That's what we do.
Yeah. Who bids less?
Cool.
You maybe.
2025, all right.
I think also
if you just put your name down on a list that we have at the exit, then yeah, excellent. And also what I was curious about, like, when you talk about ownership or shared car fleets, we sort of skipped over autonomous driving cars. We've seen one example of it, but what do you think of the benefits of autonomous driving cars with respect to vehicle to X solutions? Does it have an added benefit?
You can drink beer. and still get home.
I think one of my slides was actually, and here we go again, it was in my slides. It was about the business case of, let's say, using your car battery to do vehicle to whatever compared to a stationary battery system, because we also make those. So I think they both have their advantages and obviously also their disadvantages. So with those, let's say, battery being on wheels, I think it's at least possible to take out hotspots in the net that are not there where the car is at that moment, because the car can go over there and actually support the grid. So, you know, from a, let's say, I'm probably cutting corners left and right, but I would see an advantage of a car being able to drive there where the energy is needed.
So you send the car to where the energy is needed?
Yeah, obviously.
Oh, and not get the car out of where we don't want them to use energy?
Or maybe also.
Yeah.
And imagine this, that you're in a congress at, let's say, 9 a.m. and you want to go home and you say, hey, let's go in 5 minutes, and the car's coming from the depot, where the whole, well, they're all combined. They are one big battery, and they'll pick you up right in front of the Congress Center. So, and then it helps that you can put them in a large hub. So autonomous driving brings you back and forth. When it's done, it's I think the holy grail.
And when will we see that?
A bit longer, further along the way. Let's say 2030. 2030. Don't quote me on it, but yeah, yeah.
I just had one more thought about resilient infrastructure. I mean, we have one of the best energy networks in the world. So I don't think we will rely on this as an actual structural mechanism that, how cool as it is, that cars will always go where something's needed. But you want a super resilient infrastructure. Let's say someone, you know, fires a rocket to weaken your economy on your country. You know, you were extra resilient if then, in such a very bad scenario, 200 cars immediately go there and fix it. It's like an organism that can, if it's actually hurt, fix itself. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, sounds cool. Any thoughts on that from the audience? Cars coming to the rescue? It sounds like some kids' television program, actually. Thunderbirds. Yeah, cool. And so one final question for you. Which aspect of vehicle to X do you think will be the first? Vehicle to home or vehicle to grid? Or another?
I think vehicle to home, because it's easier, less complex, as I did on the presentation this afternoon. It's less complex, less actors, less companies, less hassle.
Okay. Anyone differ in opinion?
Yeah. For our system, it's easier to do vehicle to grid, because we don't have to keep track of whether it's flowing into the home or flowing into the grid. We have the ANWB contract, the dynamic prices, it's in place, so we can just utilize that. So for us, vehicle to grid is easier than vehicle to home.
Okay. And Melvin, how's that for you?
I believe in vehicle to grid because on a large scale you can do more, also on part of the energy network, and but you need to do that together with sharing cars or with the VVA. Mm-hmm. So I think together you can make a big scale. It's important.
Gather enough kilowatts. Yeah. Yuri, one final thought?
I think for AC charging, probably vehicle to home be first, to be honest, and then vehicle to grid. I think it's just legislatively easier to get that done, rather than feeding back to the grid.
Yeah, because for the other part, we still need to have that beer and have a deep brain dive to see how we can fix it all. Yeah. Well, thank you for your great insights, and thank you all for staying and being so patient to see everything. I hope you learned a lot, and I'll give the word back to Henk.